6 weeks ago, I was the person everyone in my office called when they needed help attaching a file to an email. I'm not exaggerating even slightly. I've never built a computer from components, never written a single line of code in any programming language, never opened a command prompt intentionally for any purpose, and never considered myself anything other than a basic everyday computer user who knew just enough to get work done without calling technical support more than twice a year. And 6 weeks ago, I removed Windows 11 from my laptop completely and replaced it with Linux Mint. Not because someone technically sophisticated walked me through the process step by step. Not because I spent months carefully preparing and studying. Because I got tired of my laptop feeling noticeably slower every single week, tired of advertisements appearing inside my start menu on a computer I paid real money for, tired of updates silently changing things I had carefully configured, and tired of feeling like the computer sitting on my desk was working for Microsoft's commercial interests instead of working for me. This video is the completely honest account of what happened when someone with genuinely zero technical skills made that switch, because I believe the people who need this information most are exactly the people who assume without investigation that it could never realistically apply to them. Let me tell you what pushed me over the edge, because the specific moment matters for anyone sitting in a similar frustrated place right now. I had been noticing for months that my laptop, which was only 3 years old and should have been performing well, felt increasingly sluggish in ways I could not explain. Applications took noticeably longer to open than they used to. Switching between browser tabs felt hesitant and unresponsive. The machine developed a persistent habit of becoming warm and running its fan loudly during periods when I was not doing anything demanding at all. I assumed it was normal. Age-related decay. I assumed it was the natural accumulation of software over time. Then, one afternoon, I opened Task Manager out of curiosity after watching a video about Windows performance and discovered that my machine was consuming nearly 4 gigabytes of RAM before I had opened a single application of my own choosing. I had 16 gigabytes installed. A full quarter of my available memory was being consumed by background processes I had never heard of, running continuously throughout every session for purposes I could not identify or understand. That specific discovery was the moment I started researching alternatives seriously, rather than dismissing the idea as something reserved for technically sophisticated people. The research phase lasted 2 weeks, and I want to be transparent about what it actually involved, because I think people significantly overestimate how much preparation is genuinely necessary. I watched approximately 8 YouTube videos specifically about Linux Mint for Windows users. I read 3 beginner guides written for people without technical backgrounds. I joined the Linux Mint community forum and spent time reading questions from other beginners and the patient responses they received from community members. What I found consistently across all of these sources was that Linux Mint had been specifically and deliberately designed to be the most accessible possible transition experience for people coming from Windows, and that the horror stories about Linux requiring command line expertise and deep technical knowledge to function were describing a version of Linux that had not accurately represented the current reality for several years. The reputation was significantly outdated. The reality in 2026 was substantially more approachable than the reputation suggested, and I decided the only way to know for certain was to try it personally without committing to anything permanent or irreversible. The live USB session was the discovery that removed my final hesitation entirely, and I want to spend time explaining it clearly, because it is the single most important piece of practical information for nervous, non-technical users seriously considering this transition. You can download Linux Mint completely free from the official Linux Mint website without paying anything. You can write that downloaded file to a USB drive using a free application called Balena Etcher that works like any other simple consumer application. You select the downloaded file, you select the USB drive you want to use, you click the flash button, and you wait approximately 10 minutes while it completes. You then restart your computer, press a specific key during startup to access the boot menu, which is usually F12 or F2, and is briefly displayed on screen during startup. Select the USB drive from the list, and Linux Mint loads completely and fully functional directly from the USB drive without touching your Windows installation in any way whatsoever. Your Windows operating system sits completely untouched on your hard drive throughout the entire experience. Nothing is installed on your machine, nothing has changed. You are simply running Linux Mint temporarily from the USB drive to experience what it genuinely feels like before making any permanent decision about your computing future. I spent an entire Saturday in this live USB session, and what I found genuinely surprised me in ways I had not allowed myself to expect based on the reputation I had absorbed over years. The desktop looked immediately familiar in its fundamental logic. Taskbar sitting at the bottom of the screen exactly where Windows trained me to expect it. Application menu in the bottom left corner opening with a familiar click. Files and folders organized in a hierarchy that made intuitive sense from the very first moment of exploration. I opened the web browser, and it worked immediately. I navigated to YouTube and watched a video, and the audio worked without any configuration. I opened the file manager and moved through the folder structure exactly as I would on Windows. I opened the Software Center and searched for applications I recognized by name and found Chrome, Spotify, and Zoom, all available and installable with a single click. I spent 8 complete hours in that live session and encountered 0 moments where I felt genuinely lost, stuck, or in urgent need of technical assistance from anyone. By the end of that Saturday afternoon, I had made my decision with confidence. The installation process the following weekend took 23 minutes from starting the installer to sitting at a fully configured and functional Linux Mint desktop, ready for daily use. The installer presents every decision as a visual, step-by-step process in completely plain language without assuming any technical knowledge from the person following it. It asks you to select your preferred language. It asks you to confirm your keyboard layout. It asks you to choose your time zone from a visual interactive map. It asks you to create a username and a password. It asks you where to install the operating system on your storage drive. Every single step is explained clearly enough that I never once felt uncertain or confused about what I was agreeing to at any stage. The installer handled everything else automatically while I made coffee and waited. The first full week of daily use on my installed Linux Mint system is where I want to be completely honest about what the experience genuinely felt like, rather than presenting an artificially polished account designed to encourage adoption. There were real moments of friction during that first week, reaching for keyboard shortcuts that did not exist in this environment because 15 years of Windows muscle memory ran deeper than I had appreciated. Looking for settings and locations they were not in. Opening the wrong application because I had not yet learned which Linux Mint tool corresponded to something I used automatically on Windows. This friction was real and persistent enough that I want to name it honestly, because pretending the transition was completely seamless from the very first day would be dishonest and would leave people unprepared for something they are going to encounter. What I also want to say clearly and specifically is that this friction was meaningfully smaller and dramatically shorter lived than I had feared during my preparation weeks. By the end of day 4, I had stopped consciously thinking about the fact that I was operating on a different operating system at all. By the end of the first complete week, my daily workflow was fully operational without any compromises or workarounds. Chrome, installed in 3 minutes and immediately restored all my bookmarks and browser extensions through my Google account. Zoom worked on my first video call test without requiring any configuration changes or troubleshooting. Spotify installed and was playing music within 5 minutes of me sitting down. My external monitor connected and configured at the correct resolution, and refresh rate automatically without any driver installation required. My wireless printer was detected by the system and printed a successful test page on the literal first attempt. The hardware compatibility nightmare that Linux's reputation had led me to anticipate required no effort from me whatsoever. The performance difference became fully apparent during the second week, when I had been using the system long enough to have a genuine and reliable baseline for honest comparison. My machine at an idle Linux Mint desktop was consistently using 1.2 gigabytes of RAM. The same physical machine on Windows had been consuming nearly 4 gigabytes at idle before I opened anything. That recovered memory translated into immediate and clearly perceptible improvements across every dimension of daily use. Applications opened faster in ways you could feel without measuring. Switching between browser tabs felt immediate rather than slightly delayed. The laptop ran, noticeably cooler and quieter during normal working sessions. Battery life, that had been averaging around 5.5 hours on Windows, was consistently reaching 7.5 to 8 hours on Linux Mint under equivalent usage conditions and habits. None of these improvements required any configuration or optimization effort from me. They were simply the default state of the same hardware running an operating system that was not consuming resources for commercial background operations at my expense throughout every session. The support resources available to new Linux Mint users deserve specific and genuine praise, because they were central to my ability to navigate this transition without any technical background to fall back on. The Linux Mint community forum contains detailed and specific answers to essentially every question a new user will encounter, written by experienced users who are consistently patient and genuinely helpful with complete beginners rather than dismissive. Every question I posted during my first 6 weeks received a clear and accurate response within hours of posting. The 3 issues I encountered were all resolved through forum research, in under an hour combined across all 3 incidents. Beyond the forum, AI, assistants proved remarkably and specifically effective at Linux Mint troubleshooting, providing step-by-step guidance I could follow confidently without needing to understand the technical details underlying each solution. 6 weeks later, I have not reinstalled Windows. I have not missed Windows in any functional sense that has affected my ability to accomplish my work or my daily personal computing tasks. I have not encountered a single situation where I needed technical expertise beyond what the Linux Mint community forum and straightforward online research provided to a complete beginner. The laptop that felt slow and overworked and commercially exploited on Windows feels genuinely fast, responsive, and personally, mine on Linux Mint. If you are a non-technical user who has been dismissing Linux as something requiring expertise you do not possess, I want to tell you clearly and directly from 6 weeks of personal daily experience that the version of Linux that exists in 2026 is not the version that outdated reputation was built around. Download Linux Mint from the official website, create a live USB using Balena Etcher, spend a Saturday afternoon exploring the live session without risking anything, and let your own direct experience tell you whether it earns a permanent place on your machine. Everything you need to begin is linked in the description below. Subscribe FOR follow-up videos covering the specific applications I use every day and every practical detail of what this computing life genuinely looks like for someone who started the journey with zero technical skills and zero prior Linux experience.